Hello there, and welcome to Project Risk Engineering for General Contractors, a webinar brought to you by AIA Contract Documents and presented by experts from Rimkus Consulting Group and Berkeley Alliance Managers. AIA Contract Documents webinars and educational materials are for informational purposes only and not meant to be legal advice. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of our presenters today, Andy Mendelson from Berkeley Alliance Managers. Andy?
Thank you, Hasti, and thanks to AI Contract Documents for hosting this webinar. My name is Andrew Mendelson, and I'm the Chief Risk Management Officer of Berkeley Alliance Managers. Joining me on today's webinar is our primary speaker and subject matter expert, Tim Brashear of Rimkus Consulting. A few words about Berkeley Construction Professional. We are a division of Berkeley Alliance Managers, which is a member company of the W.R. Berkeley Corporation, whose rated insurance company members are assigned an A+ superior rating by AM Best. At Berkeley Construction Professional, we transform uncertainty into opportunity so our clients can confidently build a better tomorrow. Our experienced underwriters deliver innovative, creative, professional, and pollution liability solutions for contractors and project owners, including customized coverages that fulfill the needs of our policyholders and insurance brokers. We offer practical risk management guidance and high-quality, result-oriented claims handling provided by our dedicated in-house claims professionals. Our mission is to relentlessly protect our clients' work, reputation, and dreams. Rimkus Consulting Group Incorporated is an expert consultant to Berkeley Construction Professional and is a worldwide provider of forensic consulting services to insurance companies, law firms, corporations, and government agencies. Rimkus assists clients in the responsive and timely resolution of claims and disputes. The company's team of professional engineers, scientists, and technical specialists is recognized for its commitment to service excellence by local, national, and international business communities. Here's a quick look at the learning objectives for today's program. And as Hasti mentioned, you'll learn one learning unit of continuing education. We're going to identify a process for discovery and analysis of typical and elevated risk exposures associated with a construction project. Examine a proactive risk engineering process, including documentation, investigation, identification of risk exposure types, and related contract factors. Understand the importance of identifying and monitoring dynamic risk exposures, and acquire risk engineering best practices applicable to multiple forms of project delivery, including design bid build, CM at risk, and design build. As Hasti mentioned, this material is copyrighted and should not be reproduced without permission for risk management purposes only, and neither the materials nor our remarks should be considered as legal advice. Again, my name is Andrew Mendelson. I'm the Chief Risk Management Officer over here at Berkeley Construction Professional. With my now 10+ years of tenure in the professional liability insurance industry at Berkeley Alliance Managers, I have about 47 years experience in the design and construction industry, leading and managing large A&E firms and projects in multiple forms of project delivery. Before I turn the program over to our subject matter expert, Tim Brashear, allow me to provide a few background comments. Berkeley Construction Professional believes that a proactive approach to risk management is an essential element of loss prevention and a key ingredient of financial and project implementation success for construction companies. We recommend that contractors establish a comprehensive risk management plan, which is embraced by leadership and integrated into your company's culture in order to facilitate positive impact on business performance and project and financial management. Today's program explores higher level risk planning for larger and more complex projects, a process that we call risk engineering. Tim will guide us through a process to identify, investigate, discover, and analyze risks that may or are likely to occur on a construction project. A careful risk engineering process includes identification of different risk exposure types and proper contracting for professional and construction services to assign duties and responsibilities in a fair and balanced manner to the project participants that are best able to manage the risks. Risk exposure is dynamic, with situations and circumstances emerging throughout the life cycle of the project, particularly on more complex projects with tight schedules, conditions that have become the norm rather than the exception in today's construction industry. The processes and strategies presented today apply to multiple forms of project delivery, traditional, CM, design build, and other forms of project delivery, including IPD. With this background of our philosophy and approach, it's my pleasure to introduce Tim Brashear. Tim, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Andy, and thank you everybody for giving me the opportunity to present today. Maybe just a little bit real quick about my background. I'm a retired professional engineer. I was registered in Pennsylvania and Ohio. I'm still a registered neutral for the American Arbitration Association. I guess I got 46 years now experience in project due diligence, construction engineering, design management, construction oversight, claims analysis. Did a little bit of performance analysis, quality management, and spent some time doing risk engineering exclusively. I was a portfolio executive at Zurich North America between 2001 and 2006. And I've managed and supervised the resolution of more than 2,500 claims in my career, and performed technical project due diligence on multiple projects, including combined power cycle plants and multiple steel manufacturing plants. For today's agenda, right, we're going to address project risk engineering and the components of what we think would be a robust risk engineering program within a project due diligence process. So we'll start with an overview of project risk, address some of the more frequent and severe contract risk, dive a little deeper into the multitude of project risk exposures, and finish with some ideas on developing a risk monitor that can be used for prioritizing risk, educate, and also be used for educating your team on the risk and the monitoring of the risk and the mitigation efforts throughout the life cycle of the project. And hopefully I don't consume all the time when we have an opportunity for some questions. So first of all, we'll get started, right? I believe that most companies engaged in construction contracting already have a pretty suitable go, no go process. Obviously, they've been making money with the process they have in hand. And this process is used for determining whether they should bid or on a project or not. However, though, and based on my claims experience, I think there's opportunities here where these companies could reduce their contractual risk and their financial exposures and significantly improve their chances for an on-time, within-budget project success. If they put it in place, of course, an enhanced and a more robust project selection due diligence process. Well, I believe that such a process would reduce the costly risk of flawed or failed executions and better serve the company brand, the reputation, and overall the bottom line. So this process must be more comprehensive. It's got to be a recordable process and consistent with all of the contemporaneous issues in the market. It should be, this is also rather critical in my opinion, that it should be capable of measuring the risk being considered by the procurement team. And then that risk needs to be prioritized in the treatment of risk within our capacity and control, so that it becomes readily apparent as to which projects we should decline or take on, what I consider to be through a more realistic and formidable risk management plan. And of course, the price that we're bidding needs to offset those risks that we retained. So this process starts with maybe some just very broad subjects such as scope, experience. And in my opinion, this can be broken down by CSI codes and measured individually for each of the codes. And each of these, our experience in each of these codes, we could have a success rating for each CSI activity within each experience that we had, so that from a historical perspective, we learn which trade weaknesses and risks need addressed in our strategy for execution and pricing of the new work. Our current staffing capabilities and alignment with scope. What does the labor pool look like in the project market at the time of our bid? Can it be disrupted at any time throughout the project duration compared to our manpower needs? not only drawing this new opportunity, but also with our other overlapping WIP. I refer to WIP as work in progress. Some people may have a different definition for WIP, but that's what I'll be referring to, as well as the market's overlapping WIP. So it's our WIP and also the market's overlapping WIP. How are we capable? What is our staffing capabilities in those conditions? So desire for and experience with the contractual arrangements and the parties involved, the type of contract arrangements being requested by the owner should be addressed in the due diligence evaluation form, and it should require identification of your experience with that type being requested, with a rating, again, based on experience and the successes and failures that you've had on prior projects using that form. So the duration and overlap with other work in place cash flow considerations. And what I mean by this is, how will your cash flow needs overlap with your WIP and work being bid? How will your subtrade and vendor cost overlap with their WIP and work being bid? This is often overlooked, and in my experience, a leading factor for contract defaults. And so this has to be rated upfront and treated in the due diligence process. Status of design, of course, this is continually an issue, but it must be considered in the due diligence and the rating that you're going to give in terms of the risk associated with the status of design. It could also include experience and concerns with the design professional and their consultants, and perhaps your knowledge of their propensity for changes or timely and fair submittal and RFI handling, especially for the CIs. This would be especially a concern with the CSI codes, where we have identified other weaknesses in those particular areas. Project location, right? In the project location, there are a couple things we should be digging into, such as the market conditions. This includes the risk associated with the quality of the workforce, the applicable labor rates, material shortage, or an atypical inflation supply chain risk in that particular location. Political and community impacts in cooperation, environmental impacts or oppositions to the project, which could cause disruption to the project and cause our resources to be underutilized and or create a loss of productivity or delays to the project. Security, safety, and logistics. Each of these should be individual points of analysis in a due diligence process. And these could include details related to theft by outsiders, the project workforce, site housekeeping, legitimate badging processes. How good is our badging processes for the labor, lay-down issues, warehousing, parking, traffic control, crane reach, site accessibility. All of these should form a part of our risk matrix and be rated in the due diligence process. The project owner. The owner financing is often an issue, right? And or over involvement could cause late payment issues or stress on contractor cash flows, curtailment, or unplanned demob and remob cost. So it's imperative that we include in the due diligence risk assessment process some analysis of our project owner, the financial capacity of the project owner, their financing arrangements, and the character of the owner, the payment integrity, the credibility, the legal claims history. The owner's, is he prone to litigate? Are there any gaps or outside influences in the financing plan that could disrupt payment or workflows? To what extent are there any budget contingencies for unforeseen conditions or reasonableness or predetermined allowances? All these things, again, are going to be components of a robust due diligence process. The owner's expertise or experience with the project type. To what extent has this owner built a similar project, and how might this impact the project positively or negatively? To what extent is this owner relying upon others to oversee the budget, payments, quality, commissioning, etc.? And to what extent do you anticipate change orders to scope based on the owner's experience in this project type? I think, again, these are things that we need to sit down and consider in a robust program. Your past work together with this owner is going to be critical in the process. What is your experience with this particular owner? The owner's stringency relative to contractual notice provisions or leniency, right? The level of difficulty for change orders or requests for equitable adjustment processing. The owner's recognition of unanticipated escalation or market fluctuations, force majeure events. Is he going to work with you when these types of conditions, will he work with you in these types of scenarios? So the extent of the owner's involvement or representative involvement in most cases, and the zealousness of its third-party inspectors, right? There's plenty of project owners and plenty of project locations where the zealousness of the third-party inspectors have disrupted the success of a project. And I think generally we know those areas, and we should be identifying the risk associated with that up front. The next area is the complexity and constructability of the project. So unique or proprietary designs and/or the owner sole sourcing the materials or sole sourcing a subtrade can cause significant risk should any of these experience performance issues once the project is being tracked. The due diligence process must measure the criticalness and assign appropriate risk to each with a plan to mitigate. So when you're identifying the risks for these scenarios, we also have to be developing a plan on how we're going to mitigate those conditions. Long lead deliverables. Depending on criticality to the project completion, the risk for long lead or overseas deliveries should never be underestimated in our due diligence process. Lead or other project certifications required. To what extent do you have persons employed or rely upon third parties to ensure compliance? Does the project location alter the relevance, the timing, or the protocols for achievement, right? These are all things that we should be considered. Value engineering involvement. Who is performing the VE and to what extent might it impact the cost in the schedule? Means and methods control. Is this under your control, or to what extent do others influence from a cost, schedule, or contract compliance perspective what means and methods you deploy? QA/QC protocols, either the owners, who is the owner of the contractor program, same as the means and methods. To what extent does each of the contracting participants play a role in this? And to what extent will the veracity of these programs impact the work and the progress and cost? Outside agency involvement, potential impact on submittals, inspections, and is the frequency, timing, and duration contractually contained? So we measure that risk based on containment, right? Is it something we can work with? Oops. Struggling here to turn the page. There we go. So in general, all the risks we've addressed thus far should form part of a due diligence process, and the process should be formal and written to mitigate project selection risk, but also to create a record, as I mentioned earlier, for reference, and also to improve the procurement process and overall success of the business. So this due diligence and risk evaluation process should include, as I mentioned earlier, a responsibility risk matrix, as I refer to it, or a register. You've probably used those terms yourself. And it should include some of the ideas that we talked about, standard and common elements of project risk, like the items addressed above, and custom elements of project risk for unique and relevant issues to be measured for the present and future projects in kind. The life cycle, the start and end dates of the risk, those need to be identified in the risk register. When does the risk become important, and when does the risk go away? Some risks occur at specific times of the project. For an example, design phase or commissioning phase, and others last the entirety of the project, such as payments, QA, and QC. So the risk matrix also, I mentioned this before about grading and weighting, but assignment of weighted risk grades. And these should consider the severity and the frequency of the risk in question for each and every one of the elements that we're putting into the matrix. This is the most critical element of the due diligence process, because this exercise creates a score for a go, no-go decision, as well as a tool that defines risk treatment prioritization and when this must occur at the bid or the design or the construction of the project. Risk, the matrix should also include a risk source responsibility. We've got to put somebody responsible for each of the items of risk. It is necessary to understand the source of the risk and who can best treat it. And therefore, the register must include both identification of the risk generator and who will monitor, manage, and mitigate the risk. So the due diligence process in the use of this matrix doesn't end after project selection. All of the identified and any evolving risk must be added to the register until project closeout. And so the due diligence document program must include dynamic monitoring with routine critical sorting capability so that you can maintain a contemporaneous ledger that identifies the elevating or the downgrading of risks throughout the project. And this will allow for you to responsibly and critically treat those ever-changing prioritized risks. So on this next slide, this is just a spreadsheet, obviously, to kind of give you a representation of this risk matrix that one might have. And this is by no means comprehensive. It's just trying to show you, the categories of risk that we kind of touched on thus far. Down at the bottom, I have a legend where the legend, the rating system that you would apply to each element. And you can see across the top, we're going to address the risk, the type of risk and the opportunity, risk or opportunity, the dates created and closed, the responsible party, the risk opportunity description, risk or opportunity description. And if there's a value to, sometimes we can put a value to this, the risk mitigation action plan, and of course the severity, right, using the legend down below. This is just an idea that you can kind of picture what I've been talking about so far. Let's talk a little bit about contract risk. The due diligence process and the risk register must include an analysis of contract risk, which we may be undertaking. So from this, we can address risks being transferred to us at the procurement stage by either developing contractual risk management plans for subsequent use throughout the project, or to negotiate transfer or reduced exposures during the bid process. But we have to understand the contract's risk in order to do that. So in our experience, the contract provisions, there's plenty of risk in a contract. We all know this, right? But in our experience, there are certain provisions that seem to have an elevated risk, both in severity and probability, that I think we're going to address here today a little bit. And these include notice provisions, the unforeseen conditions, how would that be treated in the contract, the contiguous work clauses, who is going to be held responsible in that regard, change orders, and schedule delay clauses. So in these next few slides, I'm going to dive into those with a little bit more detail. So here is I guess I would say this up front, I guess. Notice failures, in our experience, are probably the most frequent cause of a contract dispute, which ultimately and unfortunately results in an uncollectible entitlement for extending the time of performance and or for uncollectible increased costs of work. So this is an example of some of the notices that you might see in a particular form. And I'll just read it here. Notice of a claim for time and or money shall be initiated within 21 days after the later of the event that gave rise to the claim. The claimant first recognizes a condition giving rise to the claim. So that's not much time, as we know, right? There's not much time in that at all. And so we've got to be prepared. And I've seen contracts with less time than that. So we've got to be prepared that we have somebody who's managing the notice risk in our contract. And it needs to be a part of our matrix if, in fact, we believe it to be an element of risk. Notice of differing site conditions shall be given promptly before conditions are disturbed and no later than 14 days after observance. Here again, these are overlooked, and sometimes they're a month late before being identified, maybe in a monthly meeting, as opposed to putting a formal notice pursuant to the contract within 14 days. So these are things we have to be aware of what is required of us, because we could lose our opportunity to collect if we're violating the notice provisions. So the due diligence process should identify the specific contractual notice forms for each notice requirement. And as you know, there are multiple notices that need to take place during the course of a project. The chain of command, who's writing it, who's receiving it, time allowed and responsibility to ensure compliance, and the risk associated with each type of notice. Unforeseen conditions are very costly and sometimes simple to resolve, but often they develop over extended periods of time, such as site work, existing utilities, and other building substrate or underlayment conditions. So the issues with unforeseen conditions typically involve notice requirements, liability assessments, work stoppage, the time it takes to fully invest the ramifications or rectification needed once detected, and accurately estimating the cost and schedule impacts within the contractual time allocated. So I think I mentioned in the prior slide that oftentimes that time is 14 days. Well, it's pretty difficult, as we all know, to be able to identify the time involved in 14 days or the total impact of cost, right? So we've got to be on top of that. So the due diligence process should address the specific contractual provisions, the notice requirements for the unforeseen conditions, the time allowed between detection and fully vetting the circumstances, and the risk associated with the contractual provision, and in general, for possible specific scopes of work that may be impacted by potential unforeseen conditions. So I think we can pretty well pin that down up front as to which ones might be subject to it, so that there's no surprise and we're already alerted when we're working in those particular trade scopes. This is another contractor risk, the contiguous work clauses, and I think I'll just read it for you here. This is taken from a particular contract. Should proper and accurate performance of the contract work depend upon the proper and accurate performance of other contractors or trade work, the contractor shall carefully examine such other work, determine it is in fit, ready, and suitable condition for proper and accurate performance of this contract. So the due diligence process has got to identify each area of the project where this circumstance may exist, and we have to rank it, the risk, as might be appropriate. So these clauses often come with significant responsibility, and such as, this is the second part of that clause typically, the contractor shall use all means necessary to discover any defects in such other work, and before proceeding with the contract work, promptly reporting writing improper conditions or defects. And this is the kicker. Should the contractor fail to comply with these requirements, it shall bear all costs incurred by contractor, owner, or other contractors to correct the complete assembly, and shall not be entitled to extension of time and adjustment of price. So for us to build on something that was not done properly for a defective substrate, we now own it, right? We own everything under this clause, and that could be a significant impact. So every occurrence where we think this might come into play, even as a general contractor for all of our subtrades, I think we need to have this in the risk matrix so that we're monitoring it and getting ahead of the curve before we have the defect. Change orders. So this is another example of some language. The contractor shall review any change order request submitted to the contractor by the owner and make a written response within 10 days after receiving such a request. And each change order shall constitute a final settlement, including compensation for impact or delay or acceleration performing the work. This is requiring that in 10 days, we know everything there is to know about a change order that was just given to us, right? This is often unachievable, but again, if that's the contract and that's the language we have accepted, we need to put that in our risk matrix. And so the contractor can initiate a request. This is also another piece of language that I found. A contractor can initiate a request for a change order. In these cases, the change order language may require that if the contractor believes a change will increase or decrease its cost to perform the work, alter the time needed for the completion of work, or require modification to any other provision of the contract, it shall notify the owner setting forth its justification for the change and be entitled to a change order provided no later than 10 business days after getting knowledge of the change. Again, these are timing issues that are often unachieved, and so I think they take a priority if we can't alter those time frames in our risk monitor. So I just want to make this comment too. I know that it's likely impossible to predict the quantity or even the dollar value of change orders on a project during the due diligence process. However, I do believe it's possible to gauge the change order risk on contract provisions for timely notice, content of notice, the project budget, completeness of design, project participant relationships, the owner and/or architect of record, change order tendencies, and many other indicators from other elements of the due diligence analysis. So what I'm saying is I think the change order risk, the probability aspect of it at a minimum should be ranked in our risk monitor. Timeline and schedule. This is an interesting one, and again we're seeing several claims these days are associated with this type of clause. Some contract scheduling provisions that should be understood and addressed in the due diligence process could include: 1, the contractor has taken into consideration and made reasonable allowances in the project schedule for hindrances and delays incident to such work not caused by the owner. Wow, I don't know how you measure that, but that is, if we're responsible for that, that to me is an elevated risk that should be in the monitor to the extent we can identify where that might be. Because we own it if we accepted that language. Contractors shall only be entitled to an extension of time on a day-to-day basis if a change affects the critical path, and any such extension shall be equal to and not exceed the number of days the critical path is delayed pursuant to the change. The proof of such impact shall be shown on a prospective time impact analysis. Is just another language associated with proving up your impact, right? But based on schedule float, the realistic durations and detail in the schedule, constructability, the penalties for delays, the coordination required to produce a realistic production schedule, the seasons for each trade, the scope of work, and the overall schedule, etc. All these things have to be considered and put into our due diligence risk matrix and applied a certain factor. I think that all that is possible. I got to tell you though, like just the classic issues resulting from poor scheduling remain as contemporary issues because project participants, in my experience, and then with our claims experience, continue to ignore their responsibilities for achieving development, the coordination, the management, and the maintenance of a contractual CPM. I can't begin to tell you how many cases I have on my plate today that are all falling apart for one of the parties because of poor scheduling. Right, and so I think that in the contract sometimes there are scheduling requirements, like the ones I just mentioned here, that should be taken into consideration in the due diligence process. Okay, risk transfer. So this includes carving out liabilities to be transferred to the owner or others, such as some of the things we talked about here already: the default risk for sole sourcing preferred trades, proprietary designs, or materials. I'm not sure if the owner has a particular proprietary design. Everybody knows if that goes bad, how that could blow up a job. I think we leave that risk with the owner to the extent possible, but again, we have to address that. Procurement of long lead items, the insurance, who's carrying it, CPPI or OPPI or CSIP or OSIP. The financing risk, these are things we talked about, like how are we transferring that? Shared savings, LD caps, or waiver of certain damages. So successful carve-out should be risk credits. If we're able, maybe for the purpose of analyzing our overall exposure, I'm suggesting that in our matrix, we also give ourselves credit, right? So that we don't just put all the bad in this matrix, we also give ourselves credit for opportunities that are favorable to us. So owner's obligations and outside influences, right? Political experience and sophistication. These again all have got to be a part of our analysis. Internal risk management, engineering, design, and procurement. I'm just sort of summing up what we've talked a little bit about earlier today. Financing, schedule, and interest, the geography, special permits, environmental concerns, and oversight. And I have an example maybe to help us with understanding some financial, political and procurement and financial risk. So there was a federally funded technology building being built. And as I recall from the claim documents, and I can only say so much, obviously, that the core and shell part of the work, the financing for it required a phased scope of work with annual budget approval from actually, as I recall, the executive branch of the U.S. government. So at times, the procurement process, the GC may have been required to provide bridge financing, for budget shortfalls, or should there be a delay in their approval for the next year's budget. And they would be reimbursed for that, but at times, their bridge financing reduced funds otherwise available for the following year's planned scope of work when they were getting reimbursed. The subtrades were actually contractually expected to demob for annual budgeting and approval delays, if any, delays in the predecessor work due to the financing dynamics and/or budget shortfalls. So subs were contractually expected to demob when all of these types of events occurred, and remob, and the contracts were actually unlimited. Well, I think everybody can see the catastrophe in that, right? So, in my opinion, on that particular project, the risk was not properly considered. The risk that was not considered was the impact on the local market subtrades. This included their inability to manage or be capable of handling the contractually and unlimited times they could be demobilized, and the short notice involved with the remobilization required from them. So the contract itself caused a lack of continuity in the workforce and the availability of manpower because the tradesmen did not have a reliable schedule, and so the workforce ultimately would not return to the site because they found stable work elsewhere. And so, that continues to cascade. Then the trade, the folks that you are bringing on the job are starting at square one. Whatever learning curve that the prior folks had, you got to start all over again with the next folks. So the entire project was I don't think was considered upfront from a risk management perspective very well. I believe the GC was replaced multiple times, and then all of the subcontractors at one time may have been in default of their contracts for not coming back at some point in time. So I don't know what the end result of that situation was, other than it couldn't possibly have been a successful project financially for anybody involved. So I want to go next then to some more contractual issues that need to be sorted through and included over and above the general items we discussed earlier today, such as the force majeure inclusions and exclusions, the dispute resolution process, when you can, the specific and detectable ambiguities in the contract. These things need to be identified again in our risk matrix. The custom or modified form contract liabilities. So whatever the liabilities are, we need to custom or standard, we need to list them inside of our risk matrix. The schedule, the details within the schedule that should be addressed in the risk matrix should include the validation of deliverable lead times, the number of days on a week, hours in a day to be worked. What are the shifts going to be worked? Is that a risk? Meaning, like, are we working 7 days a week? Or, we work in double shifts? In certain market conditions and locations, that could be an elevated risk. Veracity of the schedule logic, and I guess maybe I come back to that for a second. Sometimes you're not allowed to work because of noise, right? In the local area on certain days, times, parts of the project even. So that all has to be understood. What are we actually allowed to work, and does that present a risk? The veracity of the schedule logic. Sometimes the schedules are not provided by us as a general contractor, but provided to us by the owner or the owner's rep. Is it logical? And if not, have we considered that in our risk matrix? The compressed durations and limited float. I think oftentimes, whether we contributed to the development of the schedule or not, we're asked then to maybe compress durations. And I think every time we start compressing durations, we're elevating the risk of success. And my point is, we should have that in the risk matrix, the ability to achieve the schedule compression. And again, the concurrency with our other unrelated work, the schedule overall, and of course, the resource availability that we discussed before. The budget, the basis for the budget, the realistic allowances, the line item contingencies, and how is the budget capable of eliminating scope creep, the change order and growth potential or restrictions, right? These are the budget details that must be considered in the risk matrix. Oops. Scope and complexity. These are some things we haven't really touched on just yet. Technology, right? How delicate, how sensitive, how dangerous is it? The mock-ups, to what extent are we able to do mock-ups to eliminate issues during construction? If we're unable to do mock-ups, maybe we've got an issue with a greater degree of risk that needs to be added to the matrix. The location of the fab shops. The fab shops that we're relying upon, is it one shop, two shops, three shops? And where are they physically located? Are some of them in communities or countries that are experiencing other issues that could disrupt, our needs? And the same thing goes with the vendors, where we're buying materials from and components from. The integration of the various contractors and suppliers is using BIM 4D scheduling. Are we able to use that, right, to maybe mitigate some of our exposures, or is it unavailable in this case? Is that elevate, the risk for us? And special architectural features or site logistic issues, oftentimes where are the cranes going to go and how they're going to access the site? Does that slow the process? Site logistics, do we have to warehouse off-site somewhere? Again, all these are things that should be considered. Again, the sole sourcing and proprietary designs should include contingency plans, workarounds, right? So once we identify that we do have the sole source or proprietary items, our part of the strategy here is in the risk monitor is to also have a plan, a workaround to mitigate it. Again, and transfer the risk through contractual liabilities. And then how have we, and along the same lines, I guess, the integration of the work of others. Are two different trades going to be needing to be in the same location at the same time? So how to work on a particular piece of equipment or whatnot. So the complexity and the integration of the work of others needs to be considered. So this is an example I wanted to share of contractual liability risk in the contiguous work clause that we spoke about earlier. There was a claim of ours a few years back it was a 20 plus story condominium building, and I think there was 1 or 2 baths in each unit, and they had been completely finished, and there was multiple units per floor. I don't remember how many units per floor, but during inspections, the tile level issues on the walls and floors in many of the baths became apparent. Because the tile subcontractor had installed his work over top of an improperly installed substrate by another trade, the GC attempted to hold the tile subcontractor responsible for the rework, even though the cause of the unevenness was due to the wrong material and poorly installed substrate by the substrate contractor. The GC suffered substantial underinsured delay cost and litigation expense trying to iron out the liabilities and to get the corrective work performed. The contiguous work clause in the subcontract helped make that possible, but the GC had never contemplated where this clause might most be applicable in his overall scope of work. And that's my point here, right? Is when we see that we have these interfaces, I think we need to get them in the risk matrix. So therefore, in this case, the due diligence process did not manage the risk by applying a better what they could have done then, had they considered it, is apply a better QA/QC or some other risk mitigation strategy at the time of the installation, and maybe all that was avoidable. Means and methods. This is often a situation where involving practical versus contractual disputes, and there is a significant risk to be measured in the due diligence phase as it relates to means and methods. Like prefabrication and field assembly, right? That's a pretty good example of this. Prefab is sometimes an aid to schedule, but if all prefabs are not well coordinated for field assembly, issues often arise. Contract drawing specs may require one method, condition, but practically another means or method could make more sense due to time, cost, material availability, or site logistics. So the timing of when practical versus contractual issues should be addressed is critical, and the risk can go critically up or down based on when it is addressed. So all items determined by the contractor are deemed to be so in the contract, to be in the contractor's mean and methods choice should be addressed as part of the due diligence process. That's my point, right? We know we have opportunities here from our study of the drawings, so let's put the means and methods risk into the risk matrix. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about commissioning and warranty details. And again, I believe this should form a part of the risk matrix. And this could include the commissioning and startup coordination, duration expectations, the service and startup experts, technicians needed, the commissioning startup dependency on others, like, some folks can't do their work until somebody else finishes their work in the commissioning phase. The warranty period desired by the owner for each of the CSI trades or equipment types, that should be in our matrix. The bonds and insurance requirements as it relates to the commissioning and warranty work. So I have another example here as it relates to commissioning and startup coordination. Basically, this was a project a few years back as well that consisted of vertical expansion of a stainless steel, a bright annealing line hydrogen furnace. The vertical furnace was somewhere around 125 feet, but another 125 feet was being added to the top. The purpose of running more of this was to gain more product and greater speed through the mill, obviously to produce more tonnage. So the installation was incredible because it was an existing facility and we were squeezing this extra tower in. So it requires an additional, maybe 40 or 50 additional auger cast piles around the current layout of the mill, footprint of the mill, and to be able to support the wind loads and whatnot. And it required this whole change out of the furnace required an add of multiple technologies, not only controlling the environment of the furnace, but the speed of the steel and all of the auxiliary equipment commissioning. So after installation, the commission required a coordinated plan. In this case, the plan failed to fully consider the risk of multiple technicians from 3 to 4 equipment control vendors. Also with the existing mill operators, which had to learn the technology because they were going to be handed the plant after commissioning. And so the quantity of all of the commissioning folks was not considered. And also their sequential or concurrent availability when it was their turn to do their phase of the commissioning. Not only that, the space and the equipment requirements that each had became a problem in tight-knit quarters. And as one could expect, language barriers. Some of the equipment was bought, from Germany, I think some from China and various other countries. And it really wasn't considered how all of these parties up front. It wasn't considered how all of these parties are going to communicate effectively, and we ended up double shifting, and probably on a 18-month project schedule that allowed for 1 month of testing and commission, we took 6 months. Okay, so and we had multiple failed startups on this particular project. So the client at the end lost thousands of dollars per hour throughout this commissioning delay, and it ended up in allegations of the GCs, the sub-trades, and the vendor all being defaulted, and all firms were involved in litigation. So it was a catastrophe, nowhere near any type of success. So I think the last thing I wanted to just comment on is like this risk matrix, right? If we develop it up front for the purpose of due diligence, right? But at the end, and if you update it, as I mentioned, and you use it to monitor your risk and can constantly reprioritize your developing exposures, I think at the end of the day, you end up with a tool for lessons learned. And perhaps it's useful on another project of the same type, but perhaps it's also a good tool to help you understand yourself and your project management processes better, and certainly educate your staff on things to consider that might be constantly overlooked because they just haven't experienced all the different things that we've talked about here today. So you have a lifetime of lessons learned, and if you get them into this risk matrix, the story doesn't have to be told. It's there in the document for the new teams to come along and learn something from it. So I think that's it for me. I think we've gone through some of the various potential project and contractual risks that, as well as the risk exposures we addressed in greater detail. I think, again, I just encouraging the implementation of a comprehensive risk matrix. I think that's where the rubber meets the road. So thank you for your time. And I appreciate the opportunity to work with you all.
Tim and Andy, thank you so much for the presentation. Very thoughtful, thorough presentation. Tim, if you'd like, advance the slides, and I think we can go to the contact slides. Our presenters have been kind enough to leave their contact information, so feel free to reach out to them. So with that, I want to thank our presenters and thank our attendees for attending today's webinar.